I'm Mark Golub, and in the news on this glorious summer day, a story revealed by the former Israeli ambassador to Canada, Alan Baker, and by members of the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee, that the Palestinian Authority is using funds it has received from the United States, Great Britain, and other European countries to pay monthly salaries and benefits to Palestinians serving prison sentences for acts of terror. The PA's 2016 budget allots virtually $140 million to support terrorists and their families. By the way, terrorists even receive added supplementary monthly income if their terrorism occurred in Jerusalem. Even more if their target was Arab Israelis. According to U.S. law, the U.S. is supposed to stop sending funds to the PA if it's in any way involved with terrorism against Israel or for making an alliance with Hamas. But the PA gets around this by creating a dummy company which does the distribution for funds for the Palestinian Authority. Well, to discuss this scandal further and other issues pertaining to the relationship between the Palestinian Authority and the State of Israel, I'm so pleased to be joined at our JBS phones from Israel, an expert on the Palestinian Authority's attitude and behavior toward the State of Israel and toward Jews in general, Itamar Marcus, the founding director of Palestinian Media Watch, a wonderful organization which I hope you all know about and visit their website constantly to upgrade your own knowledge about the Middle East. Itamar, thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you, Mark, for inviting me.
Itamar, before we discuss the revelation that the PA Authority is using American and European dollars to support terrorists in prison, can you give us an update of what the PA is doing now vis-a-vis incitement, terrorism, or is it cracking down on Palestinian terrorism against Jews?
The Palestinian Authority, for many years, promotes hatred of Israel on a regular basis, glorifies terrorists on a regular basis, and then when there's a period in time where they want terrorism, the anger is already there because they've been taught to hate Israelis and hate Jews. They've been taught to see killing of Jews as something that Allah demands, and that the resurrection is contingent, the end of time is contingent on the extermination of Jews. These are all Palestinian Authority teachings to their people. And then when, like this past October, when the Palestinian Authority wanted terror, everything is in place. The hatred's in place, the glorification of terrorism is in place, and then the leadership asks for the terror, and the people are ready, and the people are willing, and they go out. We've had this terror wave. Right now, it is not in the Palestinian Authority interest to have terror. The Palestinian Authority wants to strengthen itself before the peace talks, the so-called peace talks that were initiated by the French government. They want to strengthen their position. So right now, we have a continuation of the incitement to hatred, but we don't have the incitement to murder that was very, very common during the October, November, December, and really until a few months ago.
Itamar, why would the Palestinian Authority want there to be the murder of Israelis? It's one thing, incitement is bad enough, but you say there are periods in which the PA does not want to incite murder. Then there are times it does. Why would it ever want murder?
Our feeling is that the Palestinian Authority, this past October, specifically Mahmoud Abbas, needed a little bit of a terror war, a terror campaign, just to save his own self, because he had fallen so much in the polls. I'll just give you a sense of what this was. He'd been dropping in the polls for almost a year. In the polls that came out just before this violence started, in the end of August, 80% of Palestinians said the PA government was corrupt. 65% said they wanted Mahmoud Abbas to resign. And also for the first time in a year, Ismail Haniyeh, who was the Hamas leader, passed Mahmoud Abbas in the polls. The question was, who would you vote for president of the Palestinian Authority? 49% said Ismail Haniyeh, 44% said Mahmoud Abbas. So you had Mahmoud Abbas feeling like the people just had it with him. They all knew he was corrupt. So what did he need? He needed some violence. He needed another enemy. He needed terrorism. And that's when they created this myth that Israel is planning to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's not a new libel, but they intensified it. We at Palestinian Media Watch, we documented over 50 examples in a very short period of time where he, his government, his leadership, other Palestinian Authority and Fatah leaders all said that Israel was planning to either destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, defile the Al-Aqsa Mosque. He got the entire population fuming about this. A poll found that 50% of Palestinians believed that Israel was going to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now that's an enormous number. That's a great success for Abbas's libel campaign. And what this led to was then Abbas goes on TV toward the end of September, and he blesses every drop of blood that falls for Al-Aqsa. And everyone who's going to die for Al-Aqsa is going to be a martyr. And they're going to get rewards in heaven. This was his call for violence. The Palestinian Authority understood this. The population understood it. They went out and started killing Israelis. And tragically, the few initial successes led to many, many copycats. And tragically, all the dead and injured that we've had until quite recently, they've still been killing Israelis. So what we see is a Palestinian Authority that really knows its people well, keep promoting hatred, glorify terrorists, and then when you need the violence, you pick an issue like Abbas did. He picked the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's a very sensitive issue, and the Palestinians are able to go out and kill essentially for him. The tragedy here is you realize Palestinians were killing Israelis, and the leadership that was leading this, Israelis weren't even the ultimate target. It was all because Abbas needed political power, political gain. He wanted to get a little bit of stature amongst his people, and so he decides to kill Israelis.
Itamar, when you describe it that way, it's hard to understand why people describe Abbas as a moderate. And obviously the word moderate is a relative term. You may call him a moderate only because the people on his left are far more dangerous, severe, violent, etc. But to what extent do you feel it is fair for America, the American government, or for that matter, those in the Jewish community, to describe Mahmoud Abbas as being a moderate?
Mahmoud Abbas is not a moderate. And when I meet with government officials around the world, and I meet with members of different parliaments, and I give them all the documentation of the way the Palestinian Authority is educating its children, the fact that it's paying salaries to terrorists, which you mentioned. When I document all of this, they understand. They understand that Mahmoud Abbas is nowhere near a moderate. The only justification that I hear from different governments for continuing to support Mahmoud Abbas is that they fear, as you suggested a moment ago, they fear that Hamas would be worse, and that if they don't support Mahmoud Abbas, then Israel would end up having Hamas. The government would fall apart completely, and then Hamas would take over. Now, whether you support him for a tactical reason like that, that doesn't turn him into a moderate. He is not a moderate. The Palestinian Authority is not moderate. They promote terror. They glorify terror. They fund terror. They are not moderates by any stretch of the imagination. And if there were not this issue of Hamas that is more extreme and essentially openly more extreme, then I think Fatah and the Palestinian Authority would be categorized once again as terror organizations.
Itamar, are you aware that there is now a play running at Lincoln Center called Oslo? Do you know that?
I've heard about the play. I don't know the details of the play.
Okay. The bottom line is, here you have a play running at Lincoln Center which purports to tell the story, the backstory of how the Oslo Accords were created, how the discussions between Israelis and Palestinians began. Back channel, according to the play, nobody in the Israeli government except Yossi Beilin even knew they were happening. At some point, they bring in Peres and Rabin. They remain a very small group of Israelis and Palestinians, basically 2-on-2, working out this long, complicated legal document that results in the moment on the lawn of the White House when Arafat and Rabin shake hands, and we have the Oslo Accords. That's the basic theme of the play. During the play, there's obviously a conscious attempt by the author, playwright, to suggest that there is a sort of a moral equivalency between the Palestinian and the Israeli, that both of them feel passionately about their cause. There are things about the play that disturb me because the Palestinians say things which are not countered by the Israelis in the play. It's impossible that those lines would not be answered if they in fact were ever spoken. But one of the things that the play tries to do is create a sympathy, certainly for the Palestinians, in my mind, slightly less so for the Israelis. I'm setting this before you because I want to hear you address the argument that is sometimes made. Terrorists are the Palestinian army of the Palestinian people. And just as the Israelis celebrate their soldiers, the terrorists are the soldiers of the Palestinians. And that therefore we should not be surprised or even critical when a Mahmoud Abbas or the Palestinian Authority or Palestinian people celebrate the acts of the terrorists who are the equivalent of the Israeli jet fighter. The Israeli jet fighter does his work from thousands of miles, tens of thousands of miles up with rockets and bombs. The Palestinians do not have jet fighters, and therefore their army, their soldier, is the Palestinian, and he goes in and tries to basically wage war against Israel the only way he can. But the reality for the Palestinian, from behind the Palestinians' eyes, is the terrorist is a form of hero, and therefore there's nothing inappropriate, they would argue, with the Palestinian Authority celebrating them and supporting them, and even taking US dollars and giving them as stipends to Palestinian terrorists in prison and to their families. How do you respond to that entire scenario?
Well, there is absolutely no symmetry between a Palestinian terrorist and an Israeli soldier. Absolutely none. An Israeli soldier is defending Israelis, and no Israeli soldier is going to attack and fight Palestinian policemen, even Hamas terrorists, unless there is some kind of combat. And certainly, 100%, they're not going after civilians. The Palestinian Authority terrorists go after civilians. They kill women and children, they kill men, and then they glorify the people that killed the men, women, and the children. If the Palestinian Authority has gripes against Israel, in a decent, humane world, the people that you have a gripe against, you go and you negotiate with them, you discuss with them. Israel has been begging for negotiations for years. The Palestinian Authority, one of the reasons that they commit terror is to argue that they have no one to talk with. Now, it's absurd. If they wanted to talk at any time, they could have negotiations. Israel has had to give concessions repeatedly just to have the Palestinian Authority come to negotiate. If the Palestinian Authority really wanted to achieve peace, they would sit down and have continuous negotiations and compromise. We know that the former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who is all the way on to the left, virtually gave them 100%, or let's say 99% of their demands, and they still refused to even answer it. Ehud Barak, we know, gave them almost all of their demands, and they refused to answer it. So what we have is a Palestinian Authority that's not interested in getting peace with Israel, in having a peace treaty with Israel, and they use terrorism as an excuse for many things. I mentioned before one of the uses of terrorism is to say, well, look, we have no choice because we have no peace. So, and even if you wanted to use terrorists for something, then fight against soldiers. You want to attack, you want to fight against soldiers. Don't go and start killing civilians. Any Israeli soldier who would target a civilian will end up on trial and end up going to jail. Palestinians who target civilians become the greatest Palestinian heroes. There is no symmetry here.
Beautifully said. So, Itamar, how do you feel about Palestinians using U.S. dollars and the dollars from European nations to support terrorists in Israeli prisons and the families of murderers who are in prison.
Well, first of all, let me tell you the history of this. We're the ones, Palestinian Media Watch, actually exposed this story originally a couple of years ago.
That's right.
And we went parliament to Congress, and we said to people, look what's happening. The Palestinian Authority is paying salaries to terrorists. What did the Palestinian Authority do after years of pressure from the United States and the Europeans, even countries that support them, like Norway, put tremendous pressure on the Palestinian Authority that you can't give salaries to prisoners. So what did they do? A couple of years ago, they said, we're closing down the Ministry of Prisoners, and we're no longer paying salaries to terrorists. This was in 2014. And they did. They closed down the Ministry of Prisoners. But what did they do? They opened up a PLO Commission of Prisoners. Now, we investigated this, and we found the building was the same building. The Minister of Prisoners, Issa Karaka, became the head of the Commission of Prisoners. All the workers were the same. In fact, every payment that the Ministry of Prisoners used to give, the PLO Commission of Prisoners used to give. And then we researched more. We found many statements showing that it was actually the Ministry of Finance of the PA that was paying the money. And then what happened earlier this year, we actually found the money trail. We found that the Palestinian Authority every year increased the amount of money it was giving to the PLO by some 480 million shekel, which was basically the exact amount that the PLO needed to pay the salaries to prisoners. We released this story a few months ago, and we called this the $1 billion fraud. And the $1 billion fraud because the PA was ineligible to get funding from the international community. Yes. And by this fraud, they were getting another $1 billion. They continued to receive $1 billion a year. Now, I just have to tell you that there has been outrage in every parliament and in Congress, every single place we went. We brought this to the Foreign Affairs Committee, brought it to Ed Royce, who then had a hearing in the Foreign Affairs Committee. We brought this to Norway, and then the foreign minister of Norway actually brought this up with Mahmoud Abbas, who didn't deny it, but what he said was, it's not your money. It's been debated in Danish parliament. In British parliament, there's going to be an entire investigation that's undergoing right now about this issue. And in fact, members of parliament cited our report, the Palestinian Media Watch report, and they demanded that all funding to the PA be frozen until this is clarified. So the world is outraged by this report that we released, Palestinian Media Watch, the $1 billion fraud. And we are hoping that if the countries stick by the moral values that they claim to be standing by, then there are going to be a lot of countries that cut off funding to the Palestinian Authority because no one wants their money to go into the pockets of terrorists, and that's exactly what's happening here.
Okay, we will follow this story. Itamar, there is something else that PMW has been involved with, another story that it exposed. It has to do with Arab members of the Knesset honoring terrorist murders, after which the Knesset's Ethics Committee suspended 3 Arab ministers for between 2 to 4 months. Tell us how this happened, that you ultimately exposed this as well.
Our translators, we have a staff of 9 Arabic language researchers, and we're going through all the Palestinian official media, the private media, the leadership's media, and one day we see that in the middle of the terror war, in the middle of the terror campaign, where Israelis are being stabbed and knifed and shot at, sometimes a number of times a day, Israeli Arab Knesset members met with the families of I think it was 10 terrorists, most of whom were murderers. That's why their bodies weren't returned to the families. And they stood up honoring these terrorists. They stood up while the verses of the Quran honoring them were referred to. One of the members of Knesset referred to these people as Shahid. Now, Shahid means martyr in English, but it's way beyond a martyr in English. A Shahid is someone who has done an action, died in an action that Allah is approving of. That not only is Allah approving of, that Allah is saying that he died for him, and this person is going to get the greatest rewards in paradise. So by the Israeli Arab Knesset members saying that these murderers were shaheeds, he was saying that they were doing things that Islam sanctions, not only sanctions, but that murdering Israelis was a most honorable thing they could do in the name of Islam. There can be no greater desecration than that. There can be no greater promotion of terror than that, because you're saying to people, you want to get to heaven, you want to get the rewards in paradise of a shaheed, of a martyr, kill an Israeli. That's what's being said by the Israeli Knesset member. Well, immediately after we released this story, I would say within an hour or two, it was the top story in all the Israeli websites, and it was the top stories in that night's news. I was interviewed that night on Israeli television, and a few days later, there were hearings in the Knesset. And these 3 Knesset members were suspended, but more importantly, Israel, all the Knesset members from every party, all the Zionist parties across the board, they all said something had to be done so that this couldn't happen again. And what they did is just a few weeks ago, Israeli Knesset legislated that now with 90 out of 120 members voting to expel a Knesset member, they can be expelled. And we're hoping that this will prevent Knesset members from glorifying terrorists in the future.
Well, it's interesting. You know, the state of Israel has been so tolerant of Arab feelings, Arab Israeli feelings, where Arab Israelis have been permitted to celebrate the Nakba in Israel, which of course is their disaster instead of the War of Independence. And so what you have is the Arab Israeli community basically saying the state of Israel should never have been and never have become. And there have been people who have celebrated the Nakba or represented the Nakba even in the Israeli Knesset. And there are people who really applaud Israel for going so far in terms of its tolerance of the Arab Israeli. Now we have the Knesset saying that if there is a 3/4 vote of the Knesset, we will expel a Knesset member, meaning an Arab Knesset member, who glorifies the death of Israelis. Can you talk for a minute about how those two tensions exist in the state of Israel, and where do you come out, Itamar, on the spectrum of none of this should be seen as sedition, it should be tolerated, or at what point does it cross a line and the state of Israel has a right to say, you can't do this, you can't say this, you can't promote this. It is a form of incitement of its own. Where do you come out on this?
Well, coming with my American roots, I grew up in New York. I believe in a tremendous amount of tolerance is warranted and is necessary, and people have to be able to express what they want to express. Hatred they can express, even a certain amount of demonization, but when you cross the line when you're promoting terror, and as I've said, I explained just a moment ago, glorifying a terrorist, honoring a terrorist is promoting the next terror attack.
Yes.
We wrote a book, Palestinian Media Watch, myself and Nan Jack Zilberdick, my colleague. We wrote a book called Deception, and in this book, Deception, we have a chapter on the different motivation for terrorism, and one whole section was on what we called social status motivation. Now, this has been overlooked in the past. People talked about nationalistic, and we had a section on that. People talked about Islamic motivation. We had a chapter on that. But people missed the social status motivation. People want to be famous. People want to be well known. People want to be heroes. And what happens in the Palestinian Authority is you're telling the Palestinian population, if you want to be a hero, you go kill an Israeli. I'll give you one of the most horrific examples of this. The youngest terrorist in this entire terror campaign is a Palestinian 13-year-old boy named Ahmed Ben Nasra. Ahmed Ben Nasra stabbed an Israeli 13-year-old boy in the neck. He was riding home from school on his bike. Ben Nasra knocked the Israeli boy off his bike, stabbed him in the neck, and he was in critical condition and almost didn't survive. He was in critical condition for a couple of weeks, and miraculously he survived. Now, Ahmed Ben Nasra was himself injured, put in an Israeli hospital, and he's still under some kind of arrest by Israel because, after all, he was a terrorist, even though he was 13 years old. What happened a month and a half later? The schools in Ramallah, Nelbira, that's really the capital city of the
Yes.
Palestinian Authority, had an Ahmed Manasra football tournament. And when you look at the children in this tournament, we have the picture. The children are 13 and 14 years old. And you see the boy holding up the Ahmed Manasra Cup. And you're thinking, my God, all of these children in this picture, in all of the schools that participated, they now have received the message from the Palestinian Authority Ministry of Education that if you want to be a Palestinian hero and have a cup in your name, go out, take a knife, and stab an Israeli 13-year-old. You don't have to wait till you finish high school. You don't have to wait till you go to university. You don't have to work hard. Do something simple. Take a knife, stab an Israeli. That's the message of the Palestinian Authority Ministry of Education to its 13 and 14-year-olds.
That's a harrowing story. By the way, we only have another minute or so, and Palestinian Media Watch broke one more, a fabulous human interest story. It's very touching. A Palestinian father pushed his 4-year-old son toward a group of Israeli soldiers, telling his son to throw stones at the soldiers while taunting the soldiers to shoot at this little boy, saying that this is what Israeli soldiers do all the time. Instead, the boy approaches the soldiers. One Israeli soldier stretches out his hand, and the boy high-fives the soldier. We only have a minute. This interchange, Itamar, was caught on film by 2 different sources. Tell our viewers what each film showed. You got 60 seconds.
Well, the accurate source showed the whole exchange between the Israeli soldier and the boy. The boy does the high five. The Israeli soldier then continues and shakes his hand. And then the boy basically walks away and picks up some stones and throws them at nobody, just sort of into the air, onto the ground. Palestinian TV filmed this from a different angle. Now, for Palestinian TV, it's an embarrassment, apparently, that a little boy is shaking a soldier's hand. So what did? They filmed up to the spot where the Israeli soldier puts out his hand, and then they jumped ahead about 10 seconds. And they said, look, even this 4-year-old boy knows that it's prohibited to shake the hand of an Israeli soldier, and it's prohibited to make peace with them. So here you have an act of peace, an Israeli soldier shaking the hand of a 4-year-old, and the Palestinian Authority won't let their people know about it. They won't let their people know that peace is a possibility between Palestinians and Israelis.
Itamar, you're doing such wonderful work. I hope everybody appreciates what Palestinian Media Watch does, what it represents, how it is the finest in many ways of what we as the Jewish people are trying to do. It is always so kind of you to give me time from Israel and to sit with me when you come to the United States. I will continue to chase you, but kol hakavod, I wish you kol tuv hatzlacha. We will talk again very soon.
Thanks very much.
Be well. Itamar Marcus, the founding director of Palestinian Media Watch. If you're not a regular visitor to PMW, their website, please be sure to check it out. It's at palwatch.org. You get the latest information on the words and deeds of the Palestinian Arab community. As always, my thanks to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, JBS's associate director, Dara Golub, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.